February 1943, the Tunisian desert. Hot sand swept across the charred wrecks of tanks after the Battle of Sidi Bou Zid. The North African front remained shrouded in dust and smoke, where German and American forces were facing each other directly for the first time. Amid the chaos, an American tank was captured, intact, its engine still warm. It was an M4A1 Sherman, serial number USA 3067641, manufactured by Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio. Its name was painted in white on the hull, War Daddy 2. It belonged to Company G, 1st Armored Regiment, 1st Armored Division, a unit that had fought from Algeria to Tunisia, representing the emerging strength of the United States on the battlefields of World War II. To the Germans, capturing a Sherman wasn't unusual. They had seen many American tanks destroyed during the campaign. But what shocked them was that this tank was not damaged. It could still run. It could still fight. So rare was this that, in their battlefield report, the Germans made a special note. American tank, still operational, captured near Sidi Bou Zid. None of them knew that this very tank would soon leave the Tunisian desert, travel thousands of kilometers to Kummersdorf, Germany's secret weapons testing center. And there, it would force the top engineers of the Third Reich to confront a terrifying truth. The Americans had triumphed not just through their weapons, but through the industry that knew how to build them. From a forgotten trophy buried in the hot sand, War Daddy the Second Pafortas would become a symbol of the wartime industrial revolution, exposing a painful contrast between two opposing philosophies: the proud precision of German engineering and the rugged, simple, and effective design of American industry. This is where the story begins, amid the burning sands of North Africa, where an ordinary Sherman tank rewrote the history of America's true strength. War Daddy 2 was captured nearly intact among the wreckage at Sidi Bou Zid. Officers from Espzabt 501, the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, approached, circling the tank as if faced with a mystery. Dust still clung to the steel hull, but the Continental R975 radial engine inside could start with just a few quick actions. One German officer chuckled. American tank, nothing but a farmer's tractor. It sounded like mockery, but within days, no one would be laughing. Instead of dismantling or destroying it, German High Command ordered the Sherman to be transported to the port of Sfax, over 80 miles away. The route passed through scorching land, full of sand pits and jagged rocks, the kind of terrain where even the Panzer IV often snapped sprockets or overheated. A reconnaissance team was assigned to test drive War Daddy 2 to assess its condition. They had no idea they were about to witness something no German tank had ever achieved. On the first day, the Sherman rolled smoothly. No black smoke, no gearbox whine. On the second day, the engine oil was still clean, coolant levels steady. By the fourth day, just a few miles from Sfax, the commanding lieutenant wrote in his journal, "Engine has not overheated, despite air temperatures exceeding 40 degrees. Gearbox remains smooth, no adjustments needed. Unbelievable." The Germans were used to tanks like the Panther needing a break every 30 kilometers for inspection. But War Daddy 2, despite being a captured machine, ran as if it were still on American soil. When they arrived in Sfax, German soldiers wiped the sand off the hull and saw the white star beneath the hastily painted black cross. No one said a word, but everyone knew they had just seen something different. Not just a tank, but an industrial mindset. From Sfax, War Daddy 2 was loaded onto a freighter headed across the Mediterranean. An urgent directive from the Heereswaffenamt, Germany's Army Weapons Office, was sent to every transit station. This American tank must reach Germany intact and fully operational. All costs and risks are acceptable. The ship arrived in Naples, and the journey continued by rail through Austria into Germany. On a flatbed railcar, the desert-scorched Sherman looked like an alien guest among the melting spring snow of Europe. German civilians in small towns watched the train carrying the American trophy roll by. They murmured in awe with a touch of disdain, still believing German engineering was unmatched. None of them knew that this tank would soon confound Berlin's top engineers. Spring 1943. War Daddy II arrived at Kummersdorf, about 25 kilometers south of Berlin. This was the Nazi testing center for everything, from armor-piercing shells and jet engines to the earliest Panther prototypes. The Sherman was labeled Versuchsfahrzeug 259 with test license plate WH058941. The meticulous Kummersdorf engineers began measuring every detail. They noted welded turret, 51 mm thick armor, sloped at 56 degrees, radial engine, 9 cylinders, Continental R975, 5-speed gearbox, synchronized 2-to-5. Final drive uses herringbone gears, rare design. Every component, every photo was carefully documented. A preliminary report, dozens of pages thick, was sent to Berlin within the first week. Its conclusion was brief. Simple construction, unrefined manufacturing, but astonishing operational performance. The Germans had always taken pride in their tanks as paragons of precision engineering. Each Panther and Tiger was hand-assembled, with gears ground by hand to thousandths of a millimeter. But the Sherman was different. It was born in factories where workers weren't engineers, where assembly lines ran around the clock, and where every part was replaceable. Its herringbone gears allowed smooth and durable power transfer without requiring tight tolerances. Its welds weren't perfect, but they held, and most importantly, everything could be mass-produced. One German engineer scribbled a note in the margin. "This machine doesn't need craftsmen, just disciplined workers." That was the soul of American industry, a harmony of machines, people, and process, not to build a perfect vehicle, but to build 10,000 good enough to win. When the engine was run, the sound of the Continental R975 echoed through the Kummersdorf facility. The noise was steady, rich, with no vibration and no smoke. Drivetrain engineer Willy Hagen recorded, "Engine ran steadily for 3 continuous hours. Gearbox shifted smoothly, no adjustments needed. The entire system functions as one cohesive unit." He looked up at the hull, where the faded American star peeked through the gray paint, and said, "This is something we've never achieved." Weeks later, the first report was submitted to the Armaments Ministry in Berlin. The final line was underlined in red. "The continuous operational capacity of the American tank surpasses that of German tanks of similar weight. Further study of its design philosophy is necessary." From a forgotten war trophy in the desert, War Daddy II had now become a subject of national research. For the first time, the Germans realized that America's true strength didn't lie in tactics or manpower, but in production lines halfway across the world. And just months later, this Sherman would be showcased at a special demonstration before Armaments Minister Albert Speer. There, in front of hundreds of officers and engineers, the Germans would witness what they refused to believe: an American machine that ran more easily, more reliably, and more durably than anything they had ever built. June 1943. After weeks of testing at Kummersdorf, War Daddy II was ordered to be transported to Hillersleben, Nazi Germany's largest proving ground, where weapons were showcased for high-ranking commanders. That year's event was especially significant. Albert Speer himself, Minister of Armaments and Munitions, and the man in charge of all German military industry, would attend. Joining him were dozens of generals, engineers, and executives from tank manufacturers like Henschel, MAN, and Daimler-Benz. The goal of the demonstration, to compare the performance of Germany's newest tank models with captured Allied vehicles. Morning of June 6, 1943, the trials begin. Northern Germany's air was chilly. Dust swirled along the test track as the tanks lined up. At the front were three machines representing three very different mechanical philosophies. Panther Ausf D, the Wehrmacht's New Hope, weighing 45 tons, equipped with the 75 mm KWK-42 gun. Ferdinand, a 65-ton behemoth with an advanced but complex electric drive system. And between them, the M4A1 Sherman War Daddy II, compact, lower profile, repainted in German gray, with test plate WH058941. The Americans weren't there, but their machine was about to speak for the entire industrial might across the Atlantic. The first trial, climbing a 35-degree slope, a standard test of torque and power transfer. The Sherman was selected to go first. The German driver, a sergeant experienced with Panzerfuß, started the engine. The Continental R975 radial engine came to life smoothly and steadily. The tank moved forward slowly, then climbed the sandy slope at a consistent speed. No slipping, no loss of momentum. At the top, the exhaust remained clean, engine sound unchanged. Engineers noted, average speed 14 km/h, no power loss, temperature stable. Next came the Panther D, Germany's trump card. Its 700 horsepower Maybach HL230 roared like a beast. The Panther began its ascent faster than the Sherman, but just seconds in, the engine faltered. Tracks slipped in the sand. The tank shuddered violently. The driver had to ease off the throttle to avoid snapping the drive shaft, a common technical failure. The Panther made it up, but slowly, with black smoke engulfing its rear by the time it reached the top. Finally came the Ferdinand, weighing 65 tons. Its electric drive system, an engineering marvel by Ferdinand Porsche, began its climb. Halfway up the slope, the vehicle wobbled, then stalled. The engine howled as white smoke poured from the engine bay. The electrical system had overloaded. The test had to be halted. Silence fell across the test field. No one said a word. Speer peered through his glasses, eyes locked on the Sherman, still idling calmly atop the hill, its engine humming low like a confident breath. After the trial, Speer approached War Daddy II. He opened the engine bay, inspected the cooling system and gearbox, then quietly said to the lead engineer, "The Americans didn't try to build perfection. They built something that works, forever." Engineers carefully recorded every word. That afternoon, Speer ordered the gearbox opened. Inside, the herringbone gears still gleamed, no signs of wear after hundreds of kilometers of testing. Speer shook his head. "We focused too much on precision and forgot about durability." The Hillersleben test results were compiled into a special report for the High Command. One line was underlined in red. The American M4A1 Sherman demonstrates unusual mechanical stability and high reliability. The radial engine performs well in all weather conditions. Drivetrain is easy to handle. Gearbox shifts smoothly. Climbing ability and continuous operation exceed expectations. 3 weeks later, on June 27, 1943, Das Reich, Nazi Germany's top propaganda outlet, published an article praising a tank model from North American industry. The article read, "The Sherman is a representative product of North American laboratories, a commendable machine of American steelmaking." Behind those carefully chosen words lay quiet concern. Within engineering circles, the truth was clear. The Americans had not only caught up, they had overtaken. Years after the war, in his memoirs, Albert Speer still recalled that morning in Hillersleben, 1943. He wrote, "Reports from units in Italy and North Africa confirmed that the Sherman could climb mountains our experts deemed impassable. It was light, strong, and simple. But above all, it always worked." For Speer, it was the moment he realized the war would not be decided only on the battlefield. but also in the factories across the ocean, where tens of thousands of Americans worked around the clock, turning steel and oil into machines that kept running. War Daddy 2 continued to be tested for months at Kummersdorf. The data collected forced the Germans to reconsider their views. They began to understand that modern war wasn't won by armor thickness or gun caliber, but by a system's ability to remain operational. And that was exactly what America, through industrial spirit, discipline, and faith in machinery, did better than anyone else. The Hillersleben demonstration ended, but its impact rippled across the German engineering community. Those who once believed German tanks were the global standard began to doubt. From Berlin to Augsburg, inside the factories of MAN, Henschel, Daimler-Benz, a quiet question spread. Why are American tanks so durable? After the showcase, War Daddy II was returned to Kummersdorf for extended testing. The goal: determine the Sherman's true endurance limits. The tank was run continuously over dirt roads, through sparse forests and grasslands. Every 100 kilometers, the engineering team stopped to disassemble and inspect components for wear, then reassemble. When the test distance exceeded 2,000 kilometers, they realized the unthinkable. No gearbox failure, no engine burnout, no cracked drive gears. Kummersdorf's internal report stated clearly: operational lifespan before requiring overhaul, 2,000 to 2,400 kilometers, 3 to 4 times longer than the current Panther standard. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, Germany's pride, the Panther AOSFD, was revealing fatal flaws. The Panther's final drive gears often broke after just 100–150 kilometers of marching. The drivetrain overheated, engine oil leaked, and the gearbox failed during abrupt shifts. Frontline command issued a directive: use of third gear prohibited except in emergencies. When this news reached Speer, he could only sigh. In Berlin, engineers now had irrefutable proof. The Sherman, a so-called mass-market product from America, was outperforming Germany's finest mechanical achievements. Reports from Kummersdorf were sent to the Armaments Ministry, along with detailed images of the gearbox and drivetrain. German engineers couldn't understand. How could American mechanical parts, produced in bulk, with loose tolerances, last longer than their own hand-polished, precision-made components? The answer lay in design philosophy. Germans built tanks like watches, precise, intricate, but fragile. Americans built tanks like trucks, sturdy, easy to repair, and replaceable. Sherman was engineered with mechanical surplus, every gear and axle rated well beyond the needed load. To Germans, that was wasteful use of material. To Americans, it was an investment in reliability. On the Eastern Front, summer 1943, during Operation Citadel, Kursk, 200 Panthers were deployed. Within the first 3 days, over 50% were out of action, not from enemy fire, but mechanical failure. The July 10, 1943 report noted, only 16% of Panthers are combat ready. By year's end, that figure rose only to 37%. Even after improvements by early 1944, the Panther's best operational rate reached just 78%, under ideal conditions. And the Sherman? According to U.S. Army statistics, during the same period, frontline units reported average Sherman readiness above 85–90%. In Italy, a report from General Albert Kesselring to Berlin admitted, American tanks can operate for extended periods without maintenance. It was an unofficial acknowledgement, but the most honest one, from the enemy. Inside German tank factories, the atmosphere grew heavy. The chief engineer of Henschel, after reading the Kummersdorf report, wrote in his journal, "We may win the battle of engineering, but we are losing the battle of industry." In reality, German industry was stretched to its limits. Each Panther required 150,000 labor hours, and hundreds of parts could only be made in a few specialized factories. In contrast, each Sherman took roughly 40,000 hours to build and could be assembled at any auto plant, from Ford and Chrysler to Fisher Body. Absolute standardization of every bolt, bearing, and gasket had turned America into the world's giant factory. Meanwhile, Germany, with hundreds of Panther and Tiger variants, was paralyzing itself. On the battlefield, the difference was even clearer. American tank crews could swap a Sherman's gearbox in 6 hours, in the middle of a field. German crews needed a full day, cranes, and factory engineers. Sherman drivers needed just a few days of training to operate smoothly, thanks to its synchronized 2-to-5 gearbox. No double clutching required. Panther drivers trained for months to avoid snapping the drive shaft while shifting. In America, every soldier was a cog in a vast, smoothly running machine. In Germany, each soldier was an artisan tasked with tending to a fragile masterpiece. By late 1943, during technical meetings at the German Armaments Ministry, a new term emerged: Betriebliche Zuverlässigkeit, operational reliability. It was something they had never made a design priority. German engineers realized they could build more powerful machines, but not more of them, not faster, and not with any guarantee they would function when needed. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland ran 24/7. Each day, the U.S. produced hundreds of identical Shermans, interchangeable in every part, and most importantly, they always worked. By the end of 1943, Panther, 3,000 units built, average readiness 40-50%. Tiger before 9 to 300 units, with a production cost 5 times that of a Sherman. Sherman, over 17,000 units with a 90% operational rate. The difference wasn't just in numbers, it was in the core philosophy of industry. The Germans built to conquer, the Americans built to win. Engineers at Kummersdorf wrote the final line in their December 1943 summary. American tanks represent an industrial capability that Germany has not achieved. This is not a failure of science, but a failure of production organization. And that was when Albert Speer fully understood. Germany wasn't just losing on the battlefield of steel and fire, but in the war of assembly lines, workers, and factories. 1944. In the skies over Germany, air raid sirens wailed every night. Flashes in the western horizon signaled incoming waves of bombers. For the first time in history, war no longer stayed on the battlefield. It struck directly at the industrial heart of a nation. On the night of April 27th to the early morning of April 28th, 1944, over 300 Royal Air Force (RAF) bombers took off from Britain, carrying thousands of tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs. Target: the city of Friedrichshafen on Lake Constance, home to 2 of Germany's most vital industrial facilities, the Maybach engine factory and the ZF, Zahnradfabrik Friedrichshafen, gearbox plant. 2:12 a.m. The entire city was ablaze. The Maybach plant, manufacturer of HL-210 and HL-230 engines for the Panther and Tiger tanks, was hit directly. The camshaft foundry and assembly lines were completely destroyed by fire. Right next door, the ZF plant, supplier of gearboxes for all German tanks, was reduced to ashes. An internal armaments ministry report sent to Albert Speer stated bluntly, "Friedrichshafen facility completely destroyed. Production cannot be restored within 6 months." Speer understood immediately. Germany had just lost the heart of its tank industry. When the Panther and Tiger lines stopped, everything collapsed like dominoes. Assembly plants in Kassel, Nuremberg, and Hanover waited for parts that never arrived. Tanks on the production line had to be disassembled and set aside, awaiting replacement components. Frontline units sent urgent telegrams back to Berlin. No engines, no spare gearboxes, cannot repair disabled tanks. The remaining workers labored in underground shelters under dim oil lamps, with air raid sirens constantly overhead. As the labor force dwindled, the Nazis turned to forced labor, prisoners, foreigners, and even workers from concentration camps. Production quality plummeted. A technical report noted, gearboxes contain metal shavings, oil seals installed backwards, cylinders insufficiently polished. Many brand-new Tigers had to be towed back for repairs. Speer, once a firm believer in German industrial power, could now only describe it as a war of exhaustion. In America, during those same nights, the factory lights still blazed as bright as day. At the Detroit Arsenal tank plant, the Sherman production line ran 24 hours a day, 3 shifts non-stop. Over 50,000 workers, men, women, and former farmers, mechanics, students, labored with a simple belief. If we keep the machines running, our sons will survive. Each M4 Sherman rolled off the line in just a few hours. Every tank identical, same engine, same gearbox, same bolt sizes. If one broke down in battle, another could instantly donate parts. In the final years of the war, the U.S. built 49,324 Shermans, more than the entire combined output of German tanks. And most importantly, nearly all of them worked. When Speer read the damage report from Friedrichshafen, he remained silent for a long time. Beneath the report, his secretary noted, "The minister whispered, 'We can no longer win with engineering. We have lost through industry.'" From that point on, the concept of system reliability began appearing in German technical documents. But it was too late. The once Swiss watch-like German war machine was now breaking down, gear by gear. Meanwhile, across the ocean, America's industrial engine kept moving forward, stable, steady, unstoppable. Winter 1945. Snow blanketed the roads leading to the Rhine, covering a Germany on its last legs. German tanks were becoming rare, not because they had been destroyed, but because they no longer ran. No engines, broken gearboxes, snapped tracks, and empty fuel tanks. The once proud Panthers and Tigers now lay silent by the roadside, steel monuments to a dying war machine. And yet, among the few remaining German combat units, a strange sight appeared: Shermans bearing German crosses. In January 1945, during Operation Nordwind, German forces counterattacked near Herrlisheim, northeastern France. There, the 10th SS Panzer Division Frundsberg captured 12 intact M4A3 Shermans from the U.S. 43rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division. The American crews had abandoned them only because they'd run out of fuel. In desperation, German commanders ordered, "Repaint the symbols, put them back into battle." White stars were hastily covered with black Balkenkreuz crosses. German mechanics quickly inspected the tanks and were stunned. All 12 vehicles started up instantly after days left out in the cold. A German mechanic sergeant wrote in his journal, "It's strange. American tanks sleep in the snow but just pour in fuel, and they wake up." The Shermans, now wearing German markings, were grouped into the 13th Company, 10th SS Panzer Regiment, tasked with reconnaissance and rapid counterattacks. In a battle near the village of Offendorf, 2 captured Shermans covered over 40 kilometers in freezing weather without a single malfunction, something few Panthers could ever achieve. One German officer wrote, "We didn't have to stop. No need to change oil. Now I understand why the Americans are always on time." Such simple words, spoken in the fire of battle, were the most sincere recognition one could offer an enemy. And not just at Herrlisheim. Across the Italian and Eastern fronts, German troops used any captured Sherman they could get, from American, British, or even Soviet supplies. Remarkably, unlike Soviet T-34s, which often required German modifications, Shermans needed virtually none. Drivetrain, fuel system, air filters, electrics, everything worked flawlessly, A Wehrmacht engineer reported, "American tanks can run for days without maintenance. Their mechanical reliability is almost suspiciously high. On the retreat, many Panzer columns had to abandon vehicles due to unrepairable breakdowns. Meanwhile, the captured Shermans kept going until they were shot, ran out of ammo, or ran dry of fuel." One surviving German soldier recalled, "We saw Shermans burn, but never break. Our tanks, on the other hand, broke gears before they could even smoke." That was the bitterest confession, and the final proof of true strength: reliability. As the war neared its end, the commander of the 10th SS Panzer Division sent a final report to High Command. "Captured American tanks show superior performance and stability compared to German tanks of similar weight. We recommend retaining them for use in future defensive operations." But it was far too late. The Third Reich was collapsing, and the Shermans bearing black crosses were only the final ghosts rolling down frozen roads. Yet it was those war trophies that proved to the world: what makes a machine great is not its looks or power, but that it is always ready when the soldier needs it most. When the smoke cleared and the country lay in ruins, the surviving engineers of Germany returned to the factories once shattered by bombs. Amid blackened steel frames and scattered remnants of old documents, they found the reports, pages written at Kummersdorf, measurements, charts, data from War Daddy 2. Those numbers didn't just record the performance of a tank. They preserved a bitter lesson, one the Germans would later transform into a new kind of strength. Years later, as Germany rose from the ashes, the engineers who once studied the Sherman gathered again, this time not at Kummersdorf, but in the workshops of Krauss-Maffei and Porsche in the West. They were no longer building tanks for an empire, but for a new Germany, a Germany of peace, of reason, and of lessons learned from failure. They told one another, "This time we won't build a monster. We'll build a machine that works." From that spirit, the Leopard 1 project was born. It didn't race for more armor or bigger guns, but focused on reliability, mobility, and ease of maintenance. A simplified drivetrain, a powerful yet stable engine, and a vehicle that could be taken apart within hours using basic tools. The Germans had finally learned what the Sherman once tried to teach them: that true excellence lies not in flawless appearances, but in lasting performance. The story of War Daddy 2 was never widely told. It never made the headlines of victory, nor starred in grand war films. But it lived on in the memory of those who touched it: astonished German engineers, proud American soldiers, and the nameless workers in Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. Those who labored through the night not to make weapons, but to build reliability. In their world, every bolt and weld carried a silent vow: we'll build it right, we'll build it strong, and we won't stop. War Daddy 2 is long gone, perhaps destroyed, perhaps buried beneath the wreckage of a world that once was. But what it stood for remains: an industry that believed more in process than miracles, more in people than slogans, and in the truth that real strength isn't born of pride, but of perseverance. In every war, the machine that endures is the one that carries its people into tomorrow. Among the countless stories of World War II, War Daddy 2 is but a small one, just one tank among tens of thousands of Shermans, a seemingly meaningless prize abandoned in the desert heat. And yet, from that small detail, the world learned something great. That victory doesn't come only from a soldier's courage, but from a mechanic's hands, the hum of a factory floor, and the quiet belief that if what we build works when it matters, we've already won. War Daddy 2, not a legend, but living proof of a timeless truth: that in every age, the real strength of America has never been found on the battlefield, but in the factory,